And again, we mentioned it as being described as an alpine lake, given its elevation. And it is the largest alpine lake in the entire Western Hemisphere. It sits at about 7,700 feet. The number I have precisely is 7,731. In case that ever comes up when you're on Jeopardy, you'll have the number. There are 110 miles of shoreline, so if you start at point A and just walk all the way around the lake, come back to the point you started, you will have walked 110 miles. Surface area is 135 square miles. The lake is about 20 miles long, about 14 miles across. At its deepest, it's about 450 feet.
Wow.
This is another area where you can clearly see the damage from the fires from 1988. And this area having a little bit more difficulty growing back. You can see the size of some of the trees that are giving it their best shot here in this particular area. As mentioned, I don't want you to get too down in the dumps about it, because we're going to find other areas of the park that if I didn't tell you there was a fire there, you probably wouldn't even notice it. It's coming back so well and so strong. Again, this lake does freeze over. And again, it is a free-flowing lake, as I mentioned, which means there's always new water coming into the lake from one side in the river, and then the old water going out on the other end. Now, is there a way to tell the difference between the two? No, not really. But here's an interesting little tidbit. I get a kick out of it anyway. There are about 12 million, a little more than that, 12 million acre feet of water in this lake. Now, if you're not familiar, an acre foot of water is just about what it sounds like. The amount of water that you can get into, let's go back to our imaginary box, it's an acre in size and a foot deep. And the amount of water in a box that would be an acre in size and a foot deep is about 325,000 gallons, if I've got my math right. So this lake has 12 million acre feet of water in it. And interestingly enough, about 1 million acre feet of water flow in each year, while at the same time, 1 million acre feet of water is flowing out the other end each year. So again, can I tell you the difference between the water that's been in the lake 2 months versus the water that's been in the lake 11 and a half months? No, but because of that flow rate, because of the amount of water in the lake, 1 million in and 1 million out over the course of 12 months in a 12 million acre foot lake means that at the end of every year, you essentially have a new lake. Expression I seem to remember from way back in the day is the lake sort of, not physically, literally, but turns over, if you will. It's continually replenishing itself with new and fresher water. And yes, this water is all fresh. You are not going to get the sulfuric sort of smell you will get at the hot springs and the mud ponds. All very fresh water that you'll see in both the rivers and the streams. Obviously, we talked about fishing in them, so that's to tell you that it's perfectly healthy. If you do ever want to swim in this lake, power to you, because in the heat of summer, which by that we mean maybe the mid-80s here, when it gets, quote, hot in Yellowstone, the temperature of that lake doesn't get a whole lot past 60 or 65 degrees. So a little bit tough to swim in. Although you can boat, there's a marina or two here within the park, so you can do that. A little bit unusual in a national park, but the lake is so very big, there's plenty of room for everybody, so they do allow a bit of power boating out here. In fact, one of the marinas will be kind of passing by the signage for you. You'll see that in a little bit. So again, more fire damage, and then look off to the left, but just ahead of us, you see what's left of the damaged and burnt out trees, but look how well that particular section is doing in terms of coming back. So it really just kind of depends on what part of the park has been burnt, and again, what those conditions are. So I just had a little memory jogger here up front to remind you, and I think we talked about it, but most of the trees that you're seeing in here are the lodgepole pines. And of course, now that they've been burned away, you can see that the trunks, for the most part, are very straight. They don't usually get gnarly or curvy, and they're very good, or were very good back in the day, for felling those and turning them right away after you've sawed to the right length, into a home, to your cabin. And so hence the phrase, or common name, lodgepole pine. These are the guys that have those type of pine cones that do not open unless is great heat. And I don't mean a warm summer day. We were talking about fire type of heat. Then those pine cones will open again. It's got sort of a waxy coating around it that keeps it from opening up until it absolutely needs to. And by that I mean it's time to regenerate. If those pine cones opened up, it essentially tells that tree we need to grow some more. If we've had those pine cones open up, there has been a fire. And they naturally reseed the forest. And hopefully over time, this area that's taking a while to come back, it too will come back eventually. But it's going to take a lot longer in some of these areas. So it does look like the lake is mostly melted off. I'm not seeing any icebergs floating around out there, so it's okay for the Titanic to come back. You don't see any bergs out there, so I think we're going to be okay. It looks like it has very, very nicely all melted away, but I can promise you that water is pretty chilly. Now, in terms of keeping our eyes open for bison, and yes, we did see one right there at the side of the road as we came in. Usually up here in these higher terrains where the footing may not be so great. Yeah, great for the bighorn sheep, not so great for bison. Not crazy if we happen to see one here in this area, but they usually like to hang out in the lower elevations and in those big